I, 38M, have been divorced for a year. My ex-wife, 37F, and I have two kids aged 10 and 7. I have partial custody of the kids and they spend half of the month with me, but I still do have to send child support to my ex-wife for the time that they spend with her. My income is a lot higher than hers, so I have to pay alimony and child support both. Our divorce was not a pleasant one and we are not on good terms. I filed for divorce because we had been fighting a lot during the last few years of our marriage and she'd completely changed as a person. During our last fight, she screamed at me and said she wished she'd never married me at all, so after that, I left her and filed for divorce. She didn't even try to contact me and try to get me back after that, and it's now been a year since our divorce. 6 months after our divorce, she started going out with another man and I found out about it from a common friend. I was disappointed that she'd moved on so soon, but there was nothing I could do about it, so I just let it go and didn't bring it up with her at all. We only talked about the kids and that was it, since there was nothing else we had to talk about. That's how it's been for the last 6 months, and even though I was a little hurt that she'd moved on so quickly, I knew that she was a good mother to our kids, so I didn't do anything that could hurt our family. However, recently, she did something that convinced me that she's a horrible human being and doesn't even deserve to be around our kids. 10 days ago, I was away on a business trip and would be back in 3 days. Now technically, she was supposed to drop off the kids at my place on the second day and then I'd take over from there since it was my turn to have them, but I told her about the trip and asked her if she'd be able to look after them for just those 3 extra days until I returned. She'd agreed to it and I even have screenshots of her saying yes. So I went on the business trip without any worries, but on the second evening, I got a call from my son where he was asking me where I was because their mother had dropped me off at my place, but I wasn't even there. They'd been ringing the door for 15 minutes and nobody had come to the door, so they were waiting outside. It was freezing back home at the time, so I told them to go to our neighbor's house for a while until I sorted this whole mess out, because I believed that my ex-wife had made a mistake. Unfortunately, my neighbors were also out of town and the street that I lived in was pretty much empty on that day. I've recently just moved into a new house and the area that I'm living in is still relatively new, so most of the houses haven't been moved into. Only the house opposite mine had been occupied by an old couple, but they weren't at home and the other houses on the streets were empty and unoccupied. I was panicking already when my son told me that the neighbors weren't at home, so I told him to wait for a couple of seconds while I called his mom. Then I called my ex-wife and asked her to pick up the kids from my place and take them home because I didn't want them catching a cold from waiting in the snow. I expected her to apologize quickly for forgetting and then go right back, but to my shock and horror, she told me that the kids were my problem now since technically, it was my turn to have them. I didn't know what to say, so I started requesting her to go back and not to do this to me, not for my sake but the kids. She disconnected the call, so with shaky hands, I tried to text her and asked her if she could please just take the kids back home, and she said that she was getting late for a date with her boyfriend and they wanted to celebrate 8 months of them being together. By then, already more than 20 minutes had passed since my call with my son and they'd been waiting in the cold for almost 35 minutes. With no other option, I had to call CPS and explain the situation to them. They were there at the location within minutes and then, they took the responsibility to drive my kids from my house to my parents' house, which is a little out of town. My kids are too young to have found their way there on their own and they didn't know any bus routes or stuff, so they literally couldn't have gone there by themselves. My in-laws aren't alive and had passed away before my ex-wife and I even got married, and any other relatives that I had in the city, they weren't going to take care of my kids until I returned, so my parents' place was my safest bet. I also reported my ex-wife for neglecting our kids and putting them in danger on purpose, because by the time the cops had discovered them, they'd been sitting on the front steps of my door and were literally using my younger son's blanket to keep themselves warm. I felt like crap after they informed me of the state my kids were in, but felt much better after they'd been dropped off at my parents' house. They'd also placed my ex-wife under arrest for negligence within hours of my report, and I went to sleep that day feeling vindicated as hell, knowing that my kids were safe and sound and my ex-wife would have hell to pay once I came back. I'd already contacted my lawyer right after I'd been informed that my children were alright and we were going to file for full custody as soon as I returned. That would mean an end to all the child support payments at least, and I couldn't wait to teach her a lesson. She and I didn't speak for the next couple of days, but I knew that she had been charged with just a misdemeanor. We didn't talk until I returned. Once I came back home from my trip, I went to see my kids first and we had a long chat about whatever had happened. I apologized for not being able to be there for them in person and said that this would never happen again, because now, I was going to file for full custody and make sure that they were with me always. My eldest one looked a little too relieved and happy when I said that for me to be comfortable with it, because I'd always assumed that my ex-wife had been a good mom. She wasn't a lot of things, but to my knowledge, she wasn't a bad mother since she always seemed to care for the kids when we were together, and even after our divorce, the kids didn't give me any reason to be concerned about how life was for them with their mother. However, after I asked why he was so happy about not having to live with his mom anymore, my son began to hesitate and said that his mom had forbidden him from talking to me about these things. I didn't like the sound of that, so I pressed on, and eventually, he told me that for so long, he and his brother had been having a really hard time at their mom's place because she was very strict and stringent all of a sudden. She wouldn't allow them to have any candy or junk while they were there for half of the month, and they were forced to eat the same food every day. The kind of food that my kids refer to as sick food, not because it's sick in a cool way but because it's what I feed them when they're sick and need to avoid anything that's too rich or heavy for their diet. So they'd be forced to eat tasteless porridge and some form of oats every single day for lunch and dinner. Only on the weekends, they'd get something different, but even that would just be toast with some dip. Their mother claimed that this was all for their good health, but I don't understand how a total lack of meat and vegetables in their diet for half of the month was going to make them healthier. I also failed to understand why exactly she'd forbidden them from having candy and junk food. I understand that it's not good for their health if they have it on a regular basis, but I think letting them have some once in a while isn't going to harm them whatsoever. In fact, that's probably even better for them, because then at least they won't develop weird issues about food like that in the future. They also told me a couple of things, like when they were at her place, they were only allowed to go to school and come right back. They weren't allowed to have friends over or go to sleepovers, so they had to save all of that for when they were living with me. My kids were also not allowed to buy anything that they wanted when she took them shopping: no toys, no books, no clothes, and not even something like chicken nuggets when they were in the supermarket. She only purchased things that she needed while they stood to a side and stayed quiet throughout, because otherwise, she'd yell at them. Worst of all, she had forbidden them from talking to me about any of this, so they hadn't told me anything about the way they were being treated at their mother's house for so long. I didn't understand what was going on, so finally, I decided to talk to my ex-wife and find out why she had been doing this to our kids. When I called her to confront her, she started off by yelling at me for calling the cops on her and reporting her, but I ignored all of that and asked her about everything that our kids had complained about. None of it added up, because I paid her enough in child support to be able to afford the things my kids wanted, and yet they were complaining about never having enough, not to eat, not to wear, and not even to play with. So I asked her what was going on, and she told me that she was in between jobs right now and couldn't afford to spend everything on the kids. That still didn't make sense, because I was paying her alimony, too, so she could maintain her standard of living. I have a decent income, and the alimony combined with the child support is also a substantial amount which she can easily live off of without having to compromise our kids' standard of life. I argued with her for a while until she finally snapped and said that it wasn't any of my business what she did with her money, and then disconnected the call. Now that rubbed me the wrong way, because this wasn't her money at all. It was my money that I was sending her for my kids, and she was supposed to use the child support for our kids and not for herself. I could tell that she'd been lying, so my lawyer and I decided that along with filing for full custody, we would also sue her for child abuse and neglect, since that was clearly what was happening here. She already had a criminal case on her hands because of what she'd done to our kids by forcing them to stay out in the cold while I was away on the trip, and now, I'd be suing her as well. It's been 1.5 weeks since then, and a couple of days ago, she was served, and the day itself she called me up and started shedding her fake crocodile tears. She hadn't contacted me in the middle at all, and only when she realized that she was going to lose custody of her kids did she call me. I had a sneaking suspicion that she didn't call me because she wanted our kids, but because she wanted the child support that came along with it. I told her on the phone the other day that she'd created the situation herself, and I could no longer trust her with the kids, so she started telling me that she was just trying to mess with me a little and that she was going to come back for the kids anyway. I didn't buy it, and I told her that her tears weren't going to move me, and so she said that she couldn't survive without them. The child support was necessary for her to survive because she was in between jobs, and that confirmed what I already believed, that she wanted custody of our kids for the child support and not because she actually loved them. I was already disgusted by that, and I was about to hang up when I heard her friend, an attorney, yelling at her about how she needed to forget about the money from the child support and talk to me about the lawsuit instead. Then my ex-wife switched to talking about that instead and said that I shouldn't be suing her for something so petty because she already had a lot on her plate. She was already being prosecuted for the incident that took place while I was away, and I was also fighting her for custody, and now on top of all of that, I decided to add more to her troubles with a child protection lawsuit. She said that none of this was fair to her and claimed that I was doing this on purpose to hurt her because she'd moved on in life and I hadn't. I literally laughed at how delusional that statement was and then disconnected the call because there was no point in trying to argue with her. I didn't speak to her after that and focused on work and taking care of my kids. I knew already that my kids weren't going to go back to living with their mother at any cost, and I wasn't going to continue the child support payments either, so I've been looking for babysitters for when I'm away at work and they need to be looked after. As of now, my mom's living with me so she can take care of the kids until I come back from work. Yesterday, I received a call from my mom while I was at work, where she told me to hurry back home because my ex-wife was at the door and was refusing to leave without speaking to me. I couldn't just come back home because I was in the middle of a work day and I had a meeting to attend, so I told her to put her on the phone with me. I spoke to her and told her that if she continued this crazy psychotic behavior of hers, then I'd be forced to file for a restraining order against her as well, and then the situation would get worse for her. She didn't answer that and went straight to cribbing about how I was ruining her life on purpose. She said that I needed to have some compassion at the very least and take back the lawsuit, since it was becoming very difficult for her to mentally cope with everything at once, the charges against her and the custody case that was supposed to begin in a couple of days, and then, on top of that, the lawsuit which was also scheduled to take place this week. I've already informed my coworkers and boss that I'm gonna have to take breaks regularly for the court cases that I'm a part of now, and they're fine with it as long as my work doesn't suffer too much. But my ex-wife says that since she's between jobs, she can't afford to spend so much time and money on a lawyer as well as attending the meetings, but that wasn't my problem. I told her the same thing that she'd said to me back when I'd called her when she'd dropped our kids off at my place, that this is her problem now and not mine. I'll concede that I said that purely out of spite, but I really think that it was mostly because of how she'd been treating me and the kids ever since the divorce, and I couldn't just let it slide every single time. She had alimony payments coming in monthly along with the child support, and in spite of that, she deprived my children of a good home environment and scared them into not telling me anything about it as well. I think I'd been totally fair in suing her as well as trying to get full custody because she'd been selfish, dishonest, and a failure at being a mother. So my being rude to her should have been the least of her concerns, but she just started bawling on the call like a baby and said that I was being horrible to her. She claimed that it was bad enough that she was going to lose custody of her kids. She didn't even think she stood a chance given the circumstances, but on top of that, I was going the extra mile to sue her as well, and she said that it wasn't fair. I've been feeling really guilty about it, even though I did tell her on the call that there was nothing that could be done now. Ida for suing my ex-wife for neglecting our kids even though she was already facing charges and also had a custody case to deal with. Update 1. Hi, everyone. 2 days have passed since I posted here and I have come to the conclusion that there's no reason for me to feel guilty. Thanks to you guys and also my parents who convinced me that I was doing the right thing. I'm sure now that the funds that I've been sending her for the kids were not being used for them in the slightest and she was spending it all on herself. She and I don't follow each other on social media and I'm not exactly in touch with our common friends on a regular basis because of my work, but after I posted here and talked to my parents about this, I decided to discuss this with a couple of my friends as well. Because if there was any way to know what her real financial status was, it would be through them. My kids had told me a few hours after my post here that she would be at home most days, but on the weekends, she'd be out for hours and leave them with the neighbors. Even some nights, she would make some relative of hers babysit and she'd come back only in the morning. I think the longer I wait, the more my kids are going to open up, and I'm sure she'd instructed them not to talk about any of this to me, which is why they've been so quiet about all of this and are trying to keep it to themselves even now. So I knew something fishy was going on and I finally decided to keep my morals and values aside for a while because now I absolutely had to do a little snooping. I had avoided doing that so far because I believed that after our divorce, she was entitled to her privacy and space away from me, but that had been a huge mistake on my part because had I not unfollowed her social media profiles, I'd been able to keep myself updated on what she was up to. I stalked her through a friend's account and found out that her social media was just full of photos of her partying at clubs, drinking, trips to the beach, and her romantic getaways with her boyfriend at expensive hotels. It looked nothing short of a social media influencer's feed, and I was shocked because from whatever she'd told me, I'd thought that she'd been struggling with money and all her bills. But it didn't show on her social media or in her lifestyle at all. My friends told me that they didn't talk about this to me because they didn't think it was their place to say anything or make a comment, and I don't blame them because I think I'd sort of distanced myself from all my old friends after the divorce. My ex-wife and I had been dating since college and all our common friends were from college, so whenever I'd hear from them, I'd be reminded of her, which is why I pushed everyone away, and that clearly didn't work out well for me, but I'm getting back to them now. Anyway, now I know that the whole thing was a lie and she just wanted more and more money out of me. She was also willing to force feed our kids absolute crap and treat them badly just so she could save money instead of spending it on them like a total miser. I don't feel even an ounce of guilt anymore because she totally deserves everything awful that's happening to her right now. She's a horrible human being and I'm no longer going to let myself feel bad for her anymore, not after what I found out just now. Update 2. Hi, folks. Thank you for all the comments on the post and also the updates. I'm very thankful for it. My ex-wife and I are currently in the middle of the lawsuit and we have our second hearing scheduled for the day after tomorrow. She gave up on the custody battle pretty quickly and said that she was willing to terminate her parental rights because she couldn't afford to pay her lawyer for all 3 cases. So now the kids are fully under my custody and I can finally breathe freely without worrying about what's going to happen. As for the lawsuit, it's pretty much going in my favor so far, and I think it'll continue that way because her boyfriend made the massive mistake of contacting me today. He thought I would sympathize with them if he told me their sob story, but all it did was piss me off even more because it just made me feel like my ex-wife had been putting her relationship of barely even a year above her own children, and that was unacceptable to me. Thankfully, I had recorded the phone call because initially, I believed he was going to threaten me or something. Instead, he told me that he wanted me to stop the proceedings because my ex-wife had apparently been working really hard ever since she quit her job after the divorce. She's a freelancer, so works hard to come by, but she's trying her best to support herself, her kids, and also him. I asked him if partying every other day and spending crap loads of money on trips with her boyfriend was part of supporting herself, and he had no answer for that, but he insisted that it was all just for show and she was actually struggling with money. She'd also been paying for his tuition since he was a master's student, and that was coming out of her savings. When I heard that, I hung up and blocked him because now everything was finally adding up, where all the money was going and why my children were being deprived of a good life even though I'd been paying child support regularly. She's going to have to pay for this in court and I'll make sure of it. Update 3. Hey, guys. Long time no see. Thank you for all the concern and for asking about me. I am doing a lot better now and so are the kids. They seem very happy here with me and hardly ever talk about their mother now. She lost the case, of course, and now she owes me a ton of money so she can no longer fool around with her boyfriend and her friends, which was weird anyway because this is a woman in her late 30s with 2 kids, so I don't even know what she was thinking, blowing all her money at clubs and on vacations. It was ridiculous, but I have nothing to do with her anymore now. Once again, thank you for all the love and support.